Have you ever spent years making sure everyone else was okay, and then realized you had no idea who you were anymore? Grace Walker didn't plan to disappear, she just kept saying yes. Yes to overtime. Yes to being the quiet helper. Yes to staying in the background while others shined. And somewhere between the meetings, the coffee runs, and the late nights alone, she faded. Until one night, her boss, the same man who never really looked at her, asked her to accompany him to a reunion. As a favor, as a placeholder, not as a woman with a past, a heart, a voice. But Grace said yes, one last time, only this time. It was for herself. Now imagine it's you. After years of being unseen, you have one night to remind the world and yourself that you're still here. Would you take it? This isn't a makeover story. It's a moment of reclaiming, of standing tall, not to impress, but to feel alive again. If this stirs something deep inside you, if it reminds you of the woman you once were or the one you still are, please like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories, because Grace's story might just help you remember your own. Marcus Elliott was a man people listened to, not because he shouted, but because he didn't have to. At 44, with salt beginning to brush his temples and a jawline that still made old classmates jealous, Marcus had built one of the most successful clean energy startups in the Pacific Northwest. He wore his tailored suits like armor and moved through boardrooms with quiet command. And yet, none of that mattered. On the Thursday afternoon, he found himself rejected for the 5th time by a woman he'd invited to his 25-year college reunion. He stared at his phone, her text brief and polite. "Sorry, can't make it. Best of luck at the event." No warmth, no curiosity, just a cold shoulder in 160 characters. Across the room, Daniel Grant leaned back in his chair with a smirk. Daniel had known Marcus since undergrad. He was the company's CFO, closest friend, and the only one who could get away with telling Marcus he was being an ass. "You're running out of eligible guests," Daniel said, tossing a stress ball from hand to hand. "What's that now? 2 socialites, 1 venture capitalist, and your real estate agent Marcus didn't respond." He loosened his tie and exhaled. The reunion wasn't just a social event. It was being hosted at the campus alumni center in Denver, a place steeped in legacy, and everyone who mattered would be there: former professors, classmates now running tech giants, and the donors Marcus wanted to impress for a foundation he was planning to launch. He needed someone on his arm who made him look accomplished, grounded, and most importantly, not alone. But none of the women he dated recently wanted to play accessory. And then, as if summoned by fate or folly, Grace Walker walked by his office door. She was carrying a stack of quarterly reports, her cardigan sleeves pushed up to her elbows, her chestnut hair pulled back in that same low bun she always wore. There was a small pen mark on the cuff of her blouse, and her sensible shoes made no sound on the floor. Grace had worked for Marcus for 3 years. She was punctual, discreet, excellent with foreign vendors, and knew how he liked his coffee without ever asking twice. But she was invisible, not unkind, not unattractive, just forgettable. In that way, people who try hard not to be seen often are. And that, Marcus thought, made her perfect. "Grace," he said. She stopped and turned, eyes calm but wary. "Yes, Mr. Elliott." Marcus nodded toward the guest chair. "Come in, close the door." She obeyed without question, per usual, and waited silently for him to speak. "I need a date," he said plainly, "for my college reunion next weekend." "In Denver? I'd like you to come with me." Grace blinked, lips parting slightly before she found her voice. "I'm sorry. What? It's formal. Cocktail attire, business leaders, some light networking. You'll be representing the company unofficially." She studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, as always, she nodded. "If that's what you need, I'll be there." Marcus wasn't sure what he expected. Maybe protest, embarrassment, gratitude. What he didn't expect was how quickly she stood, how calmly she resumed her path down the hall, as if he'd asked her to book a flight or send a calendar invite. Daniel appeared in the doorway 5 seconds later. "You didn't..." Marcus leaned back and swiveled in his chair. She's loyal, low drama, and she'll make me look like a generous employer. She's your assistant. She's a safe bet. Daniel frowned. Marcus, if this is some long-game joke, you better be sure you're the only one laughing when it ends. Marcus didn't answer, but he felt the weight of something shifting beneath the surface. A wind he couldn't name moving just slightly against the grain of who he thought he was. He looked out the window toward the Seattle skyline. Somewhere beyond the glass, the world was spinning just as it always had. But inside, for the first time in a long time, Marcus Elliott had made a choice that didn't feel entirely like control. It felt like the beginning of something he didn't understand. Not yet. Grace Walker lived in a quiet world, not silent, but intentional. Her one-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill, just east of downtown Seattle, sat 2 floors above a florist and directly across from a small bookstore with creaky wooden floors. It wasn't the kind of place you found on social media feeds. There were no marble countertops or curated gallery walls, just soft light, a kettle that whistled reliably at 7 a.m., and books stacked in uneven piles by the window. Every morning before the city stirred, she would water the fern hanging by the kitchen sink and feed the stray cat that waited near the fire escape. The cat never let her pet it. Grace respected that. At 38, Grace had mastered the art of being needed without being noticed. In the office, she anticipated problems before they happened. In life, she avoided them entirely. But that Thursday evening, after Marcus Elliott asked her to accompany him to his college reunion, she stood in front of her bathroom mirror, still in her work clothes, and felt the strange buzz of something she hadn't felt in a long-time conflict. She stared at her reflection, not unattractive, not beautiful either, just muted, soft brown eyes, faint laugh lines, hair too often pulled back in a way that said, "Don't look at me." She unpinned her bun and let the waves fall around her shoulders. It made her look younger, and more like someone she used to be, years ago, before everything fell apart. Grace had a name that opened doors. Her father, Harrison Walker, ran a private philanthropic trust with ties to hospitals, orchestras, and museums across the state. Her mother sat on the board of the Arts Council. Grace herself had been groomed for a life of strategic luncheons and fundraising galas, but that was before the embezzlement charges, before the press, before the long, cold months when the phone stopped ringing and her parents' friends turned into ghosts. When the Walker name fell, Grace didn't fight to save it. She packed 2 suitcases, moved to Seattle, and started over. At first, the simplicity was freeing. She liked working. She liked the quiet. There was dignity in earning her place, in building trust one spreadsheet at a time. But somewhere along the way, she forgot what it felt like to be seen. Until today. She turned away from the mirror and walked to the window. Below, the bookstore lights were dimming, and the scent of roses from the florist drifted up through the evening air. She leaned against the glass, watching strangers pass by, wondering if Marcus had meant what he said, or if this was something else entirely. Why her? Why now? She remembered the way he'd looked at her, not cruelly, not kindly, just strategically, like she was a puzzle piece that happened to fit the space he needed filled. And yet, she'd said yes, not because she wanted to impress anyone, certainly not because she believed it was a reward for her work, but because somewhere deep inside her, deeper than she cared to admit, she wanted to remember what it felt like to enter a room and belong, to put on a dress and not apologize for taking up space. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her mother's nurse. "Your mom had a good day today. Smiled during her piano therapy. Mentioned you twice." Grace smiled softly. Her mother hadn't remembered her birthday last year, but sometimes she remembered that Grace liked lilacs. It was enough. Beneath that was another message, from her younger brother, David. "Got the textbooks. Thank you. Don't skip meals." "Okay." She typed back quickly. "I'm fine. Focus on med school. We're okay." She didn't add that her account was running low again, or that she'd have to push rent back a week. Some things were better left unsaid. Grace closed her phone and returned to the kitchen. She poured tea into her favorite chipped mug and wrapped both hands around it. She didn't know what Marcus was expecting when he invited her to that reunion. Maybe he thought she'd shrink into the corner while he shook hands and told stories about changing the world. But Grace Walker had spent years building herself from the rubble, and she wasn't made of glass. She took a slow sip of tea and whispered to no one, "If I go on my own terms." And with that, she opened her laptop and began searching for a dress. Not because she wanted to impress him, but because she needed to remember how it felt to take up space. Grace stood in the dressing room of a small boutique on Pike Street, staring at the reflection of a woman she almost didn't recognize. The lighting was soft, the kind meant to flatter, but she knew better. It wasn't the lights or the dress that made her pause. It was the look in her own eyes. Something had shifted. The red gown clung to her frame in a way she wasn't used to, elegant, understated, yet undeniably bold. A deep V at the neckline, a slit that revealed just enough, and fabric that whispered rather than shouted. Not flashy, not meek, just honest. The saleswoman, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, stepped forward. "You're not used to this," she said gently. Grace smiled. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's been there." There was kindness in her voice, no judgment. Grace hesitated. "It's for a reunion. I used to belong to that world." The woman nodded. "Still do. Honey, you just forgot." Grace looked again at her reflection and reached for the velvet box in her purse. Inside was her mother's emerald pendant, the one she used to borrow for galas when she was younger. The one her mother had once said made her look like a queen. She fastened the necklace slowly. The green stone caught the light, and for a moment, she saw herself as she used to be, not before the scandal, not before the fall, but before she forgot she was allowed to be proud. "I'll take it," Grace said. At home that night, she spread the dress across the bed, carefully smoothing the fabric like it might dissolve under her fingers. She made a list: simple things: shoes, clutch, hair appointment, nail polish the color of sand. Everything was accounted for. Everything but the question that had started to press on her chest like a weight. What if this goes exactly the way you fear it will? She sat at the kitchen table, phone dark beside her, teacup long since cold. The city hummed outside her window, but inside was stillness. What if this was a joke? What if Marcus wanted to parade her around to prove a point? She thought of his calculated gaze, his reputation. How rarely he used words like gratitude or trust. And yet, there had been a flicker in his eyes, the tiniest hesitation, a moment where he looked less like a man in control and more like a man trying to prove he didn't care. Grace had learned to spot the difference. She'd lived among masks for years. Her father had worn his until the end. When the charges came, when the house was searched, when her mother's health began to crumble, he still smiled at dinner parties. And Grace. She'd stood by the piano, pouring wine with steady hands, pretending the world wasn't turning upside down. That night, when she left the family estate for the last time, she swore she'd never fake her way through another room again. But here she was, pulling old earrings from a box she hadn't touched in years, planning what lipstick might match her skin tone under ballroom lighting. She wasn't going to pretend this time. She was going to choose it. Saturday arrived with pale sunshine, the kind of morning that smelled like clean sidewalks and fresh bread. Grace took the afternoon slow, a hot shower, classical music playing from her speaker, her mother's perfume a gentle jasmine dabbed at her wrists. The stylist at the salon was surprised at how much hair she had hidden in the tight bun all these years. "You have such beautiful waves," she said. "Why do you hide them?" Grace smiled politely. "Habit." When the stylist was done, Grace stared at her reflection. Her hair fell in soft, honey-colored waves, framing her face. The makeup was subtle but effective, like someone had lifted a veil and let light touch her features. The car arrived at 6:45, a sleek black sedan with leather seats and a polite driver who held the door for her without question. As they drove through downtown, Grace watched the world blur past. Neon signs, golden hour sunlight, a couple laughing outside a corner bar. And for the first time in years, she wasn't invisible, not to herself. The hotel loomed ahead, tall, grand, historic, She could already imagine the chandeliers, the hum of voices, the glasses clinking. She thought of Marcus, of the look he might give her. And she told herself something she hadn't believed in a long time. No matter what happens tonight, I am not here to prove anything. I am here to remember who I am. She stepped out of the car. Her heels clicked on the marble steps. The doorman opened the grand entrance. Warm light poured out. And Grace Walker walked in, not as someone's assistant, not as a forgotten name, but as a woman no one would be able to look away from. Marcus Elliott checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. 7:21. The reunion was already in full swing at the Denver Alumni Hall, where the chandeliers gleamed like starbursts, and the string quartet played something classical that no one was really listening to. People were too busy mingling, trading humble brags, and subtly comparing retirement plans. Marcus stood near the bar, scanning the crowd as familiar faces passed him with polite nods and cocktails in hand. Daniel Grant appeared at his side with 2 glasses of bourbon. "She's not coming," Daniel said flatly, handing him one. She said she would. Marcus didn't mean to sound defensive, but he did. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You really thought she'd show up after the way you tossed it at her like a company errand?" Marcus didn't answer. Truth was, he wasn't sure what he expected. Grace wasn't the type to make scenes or chase recognition. If anything, she avoided attention. But something about her expression in his office 2 days ago had stayed with him calm, but not passive. There was something behind her eyes he hadn't seen before, something he couldn't quite name. Across the room, an old classmate clapped him on the back. "Marcus Elliott. Damn. I thought you were off saving glaciers or buying small countries." Marcus forced a smile. "Just helping the Planet One conference call at a time." They laughed, and the moment passed, but his eyes kept drifting toward the door. 7:25. The air shifted. It was so subtle most people wouldn't have noticed. A pause in conversation. A quiet hush, like the space before a storm. And then the doors opened. She walked in slowly, her presence so arresting that for a moment, just one breathless moment, no one seemed to move. Grace Walker, in a crimson gown that shimmered like it was lit from within. Her hair, usually tied back, cascaded in soft waves around her shoulders. Her emerald necklace rested gently at her collarbone, and her eyes, those eyes, met the room without apology. She didn't smile. She didn't scan for approval. She simply stood there, poised, self-contained, and radiant. Daniel let out a low whistle. Holy hell, Marcus's chest tightened. He didn't recognize her. Not at first. Not really. Not as the woman who brought him coffee every morning or organized his meetings with quiet precision. This was someone else. No. That wasn't right. This was the woman Grace had always been. He was just seeing her clearly for the first time. She moved through the crowd with effortless grace, nodding politely at strangers, exchanging small smiles, each step measured but unhurried. She didn't search for Marcus, but when her eyes did find him, they didn't flinch. She walked up to him slowly, the murmur of the room dimming behind her. "Mr. Elliott," she said softly. "Hope I'm not too late." Marcus opened his mouth, but the words tangled in his throat. He cleared it quickly. "You're right on time." He gestured to the seat beside him, suddenly uncertain if he was offering a chair or begging for forgiveness. Daniel raised his glass in mock salute before disappearing into the crowd, wisely giving them space. Grace accepted the drink Marcus handed her, her fingers brushing his for a moment too long. "You clean up well," he said awkwardly. She tilted her head, something like amusement dancing at the corners of her lips. "So do you," she replied. "Though I suspect you always expect to look the part." He didn't know how to respond to that, so he didn't. For a long beat, they sat in silence, surrounded by music and memory, the ghosts of who they used to be drifting somewhere between them. Across the room, the host began calling for everyone's attention, inviting alumni to gather for the formal welcome. As people began to move toward the main stage, Grace looked at Marcus. "I've never been someone's +1 before," she said. He looked at her, really looked. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus Elliot felt small in a way that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with presence. "You're not anyone's anything tonight," he said quietly. "You're just Grace, and you're remarkable." She didn't thank him. She didn't need to. She already knew. Marcus Elliot had never minded being the center of attention. He'd built a career on it, boardrooms, banquets, keynote stages where every eye was trained on him. But tonight, as he stood beside Grace Walker in the glowing light of the reunion ballroom, the weight of that attention felt different. It felt exposed. People were staring, not subtly. Some whispered behind raised glasses. Others looked openly, trying to place the woman beside him. And why wouldn't they? The last time anyone from college had seen Grace Walker, she was attending scholarship dinners in satin gloves and pearls. Now, 15 years later, she had reappeared on the arm of Marcus Elliot, the golden boy turned green tech mogul, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Or maybe, Marcus thought bitterly, they didn't like how well she fit. "Who is she?" he overheard someone ask behind him. His fiancée? No, his assistant. "I think, can't be. She looks like someone important." Grace heard it too. He could see it in the way her spine straightened. Her fingers tightened slightly around her champagne flute. But she didn't flinch, didn't respond. She just looked ahead at the small group approaching them, led by Beverly Quinn, socialite, legacy donor, and woman who had once called Marcus deliciously ruthless. "Marcus." Beverly purred, her eyes flicking toward Grace with a smile that didn't reach her cheeks. "You didn't mention you were bringing company." "This is Grace Walker," Marcus replied evenly. Grace extended a hand, her expression unreadable. "Nice to meet you," Walker Beverly echoed, hesitating just a second too long, as in Harrison Walker. A hush fell over the group. Marcus saw it in real time, the calculation, the recognition, the judgment. Beverly recovered with a gracious nod, but the sparkle in her eye turned razor sharp. "I had no idea you two knew each other," she said. Marcus swallowed. "We worked together." Someone behind Beverly chuckled softly. Marcus felt the heat rise in his neck. The next few seconds stretched long and tight like the tuning of a violin. This was the moment. He could smooth it over with charm, dismiss the tension with a clever quip, or he could tell the truth. That Grace wasn't some corporate accessory. That she had earned her place beside him 100 times over. That she knew his calendar better than he did, had saved his reputation more than once, and had more dignity in one finger than half the room combined. But before he could speak, another voice cut in Carolyn Reese, a sharp-eyed venture partner and known gossip. "Your assistant, Marcus. That's bold. Not many CEOs would risk bringing internal staff to something like this." Marcus opened his mouth. Grace touched his arm. It was barely a gesture, but it silenced him. When he looked at her, she was calm, collected, graceful. "I came as myself," she said simply, "not as anyone's staff." The air shifted again. Beverly's smile froze in place. Carolyn's eyebrows rose. Someone coughed politely and excused themselves. Marcus stared at Grace. That one sentence, "I came as myself," echoed louder than any insult, stronger than any defense he could have offered. It was the kind of quiet strength that didn't need a spotlight. And suddenly, he felt ashamed. Ashamed that he had invited her with mixed motives, that he'd allowed the possibility of using her as a shield, or worse, a story to tell, that he'd expected her to simply follow, to stay in the background like always. But Grace hadn't followed. She walked in on her own. And now the room wasn't laughing. Now, they were watching her with something else. Something closer to awe. Later that evening, as the jazz band played and the buffet line dwindled, Marcus stood by the bar again, nursing a drink he wasn't enjoying. Daniel leaned in, voice low. "So, you gonna tell them, or are you just gonna let her carry the weight of your cowardice?" Marcus didn't look at him. "What's there to tell?" Daniel gave him a long, unimpressed look. "That you brought her here to make a point, that you expected her to embarrass herself, and that she walked in and turned the damn place upside down." Marcus sighed. "I didn't expect that's the problem." You didn't expect her to be her. He said nothing. Across the room, Grace stood alone, talking to a retired professor with easy poise. Her laughter floated across the floor like something rare and warm. Marcus had the strange feeling he was watching someone walk out of a story they never belonged in and into one they'd written themselves. And suddenly, he didn't know how to follow. The ballroom shimmered with candlelight and conversations, the kind of place where things looked beautiful, even when they weren't. Marcus Elliott stood in a circle of familiar strangers, former classmates, donors, board members, men and women who still lived like they were 25, except now their mortgages wore nicer shoes. Beside him, Grace Walker held her glass with calm fingers, answering questions with practiced poise. She spoke when she had something worth saying. She smiled when it felt right, and still, the tension buzzed like static beneath the surface. She's stunning. Someone whispered, "Wait, that's his assistant, I mean." Wow. Who knew? Then came the comment that shifted everything. "Tell us the story," laughed Everett Nichols, a tech investor with an ego as wide as Colorado. "Where'd you find her?" "Marcus, a talent agency for hidden gems." The group chuckled. Marcus felt Grace's shoulders tense, just slightly. He should have stopped it. He should have said something. Instead, he smiled. "Grace works for me," he said lightly. "I thought it'd be enlightening to bring her along." The words weren't cruel, not on the surface, but they held a sharp edge beneath the polish. There was a beat of silence, and then laughter, quick, uncomfortable, but real. Grace's face didn't change, but her eyes did. She turned to him slowly, her voice so soft it barely reached his ears. "Enlightening," she repeated. And he didn't know why he couldn't walk it back, why he didn't say no, that's not what I meant. Why he let the moment pass like it meant nothing, because to her, it meant everything. Grace set down her glass gently on a marble-side table. "I'm going to step out for a moment," she said. Marcus reached for her arm. "Grace." She pulled away before his fingers touched her sleeve, and then she walked out of the room, alone. The laughter resumed like nothing had happened. But for Marcus, something had. Something small and invisible had snapped. Daniel found him 10 minutes later, still standing in the same spot, still staring at the door Grace had walked through. "That was harsh," Daniel said quietly. Marcus didn't look at him. "I didn't mean it like that, but that's exactly how it sounded." Marcus let out a breath. "She'll come back." Daniel's voice was harder now. "If she's smart, she won't." Marcus finally turned, anger rising at himself, at the room, at the way his words had landed like a knife instead of a compliment. "I invited her. I gave her this opportunity." Daniel stepped closer, voice low. "You didn't give her anything. She showed up in spite of you. And you." He shook his head. "You tried to make her small because you didn't know how to handle someone who doesn't need you to define her." The words stung because they were true. Outside, the wind picked up. Trees rustled just beyond the tall glass windows. Music drifted from the bandstand, soft and haunting. Marcus moved toward the exit, but Grace was gone. He didn't need a doorman to tell him. He could feel it. That night, in a hotel room filled with shadows and silence, Marcus sat at the edge of the bed, still in his tuxedo, his bow tie hanging loose around his neck. He stared at his phone for what felt like an hour. No texts, no missed calls. He wanted to say something. Anything. But there are moments you don't get back. Words you can't unsay. And people you can't just apologize to, not because they won't forgive you, but because they've already learned to walk away from what doesn't honor them. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, Marcus Elliott felt not powerful, not in control, just alone. Monday morning came quietly. The office was the same, the desk neat, the coffee warm, but Grace Walker wasn't there. No heels clicking down the hall, no quiet knock before entering, no perfectly organized report stacked on his desk, just silence. Marcus Elliott sat at his glass-topped desk, staring at the empty chair across from him. He told himself she was taking the day off, that she needed rest after the gala, that maybe after the sting wore off, she'd walk through the door and nod her usual nod, calm, composed, like nothing had happened. But Grace didn't come in Monday or Tuesday. By Wednesday, Marcus started noticing the gaps, meetings missed, contracts disorganized, a confused intern handing him coffee with the wrong milk and too much sugar. He didn't snap, not once, because none of it mattered the way it used to. What mattered was that the one person who made the chaos make sense was gone. He called. The number rang, then went to voicemail. He tried texting, then emailing. He kept it short. "Grace, can we talk? I want to explain." No reply. He asked Daniel if he'd heard anything. Daniel shook his head. "She's smart," he said. "She knew you didn't really see her. Now she's giving you the gift of absence." Marcus scoffed. Gift. But he knew. Deep down, he knew exactly what Daniel meant. On Thursday, he stopped by her apartment building. The woman at the front desk looked at him kindly. "She moved out 2 days ago," she said. "Left no forwarding address." The words hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't just that she was gone. It was how completely she'd vanished. Like she'd rehearsed it, planned it. And that was the first time Marcus wondered how long had she known she'd need to disappear from his life that weekend. He went to the place she always had lunch on Fridays, the little bookstore cafe on the corner of 6th and Pine. The server recognized him. "She used to come in with a book," the young man said. "Always left a good tip. Real polite." Marcus nodded. He sat down at her usual table, ordered nothing, just sat, and thought about the woman he had misunderstood, the loyalty he had taken for granted, the dignity he had mistaken for silence. He remembered the gala, the way she'd stood under the chandelier in red silk and emerald, how the room had shifted just by her walking into it. He remembered the look on her face when he said enlightening, not broken, not angry, just done. The following week, he gave himself no choice. He started arriving early, reading his own schedules, making his own coffee. He asked employees how their weekends were not because he had to, but because Grace would have. He called his mother, sent flowers to a friend in the hospital, signed up for a local nonprofit board. It felt awkward at first, but necessary. The man who had humiliated Grace Walker in front of Seattle's elite wasn't the man he wanted to be, not anymore. And maybe that meant becoming someone who didn't need the spotlight to feel significant. One night, Marcus opened a file Grace had once built for him, titled simply Contingencies. It was a roadmap of what to do when things went wrong. Budget crises, PR blowups, legal delays, personal errors. Every possible problem he might face, Grace had already anticipated. She hadn't just worked for him. She'd worked to protect him, from the world, from himself. And he never noticed, until she wasn't there to keep him from falling. And now he was falling. Slowly, quietly, but with his eyes finally open. 3 months had passed. The rhythm of the office had resumed, at least on the surface. Marcus Elliott arrived early, left late, and learned to live without an assistant who made everything seamless. Jennifer, his new hire, was competent, smart, even. But the space Grace had once occupied wasn't just about tasks. It was about trust, and no one had filled that. Then came the board meeting. It was a quarterly check-in routine, stiff and usually predictable. Marcus had skimmed the agenda that morning: capital allocation, new markets, a proposed investment from an external foundation. He walked into the glass conference room with his usual quiet confidence, nodding to Daniel and the board members. Coffee was poured. Laptops opened. Then the elevator dinged. Marcus looked up, and the world again tilted off its axis. Grace Walker stepped into the room. She wore a navy suit that fit her like it had been tailored for battle. Her hair was pulled into a sleek twist. A leather briefcase hung from one hand, and in the other, she held a file that bore the logo of the Lark Hill Fund, a private investment group known for strategic, ethical partnerships in clean energy. She didn't hesitate, didn't look at Marcus. She walked directly to the open chair at the far end of the table and set down her materials like she had been doing this for years. because she had. "Good morning," she said calmly. "Thank you for having me. I'm Grace Walker, representing the Lark Hill Fund. We're here to discuss potential partnership options for international expansion." The room murmured with interest. Daniel cleared his throat and glanced at Marcus, whose jaw had gone slightly slack. She still hadn't looked at him. Not once. The presentation was flawless. Grace spoke with clarity, authority, and purpose. She outlined projected returns, ethical alignment, and the fund's commitment to sustainable technologies. Every word was sharp but measured, every fact precise. Marcus barely heard half of it. He was too busy watching her, not just how she spoke, but how she held the room. She moved through the conversation with ease, switching between financial models and international regulations like she had written the playbook. She answered a tough question from a skeptical board member with elegance that silenced the room. When she finally sat back down, Daniel leaned toward Marcus and whispered, "She just outperformed 3 of your VPs. Combined." Marcus didn't respond. He couldn't, because part of him was furious, and the rest was something closer to awe. After the meeting, people filtered out slowly, some stopping to shake Grace's hand, others sneaking glances her way. Marcus stayed seated, staring at his closed laptop like it might offer answers. Then, finally, she approached him. Her voice was even. "Mr. Elliott." He stood. "Grace." She held up a hand. "Let's keep this professional." Her eyes didn't flinch, not like they used to. There was no hesitation in her posture, no uncertainty in her tone. "I'm here as a representative of the Lark Hill Fund. That's all." He swallowed. "I didn't know that you were involved with them." "I'm involved with a lot of things now." She didn't say it to boast. She said it like a fact, and that more than anything made it powerful. Marcus nodded slowly. "You were incredible in there. I know." A beat passed. She picked up her briefcase. "Have a good afternoon, Mr. Elliott." And just like that, she walked out, leaving Marcus with nothing but a hollow space in his chest where certainty used to be. Later that night, Marcus stood in his office, looking out over the city lights. He thought about the woman who used to schedule his meetings and quietly refill his water glass, the woman who now walked into boardrooms and changed the conversation. He had asked her to join him once, as a placeholder. She had returned, not for him, but as his equal. No, his superior. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus Elliott didn't know how to catch up. The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday at 10 a.m. Marcus had barely slept the night before. He told himself it was just business, just another stakeholder call. But no amount of logic could quiet the pulse in his throat when he saw her name on the invite list again. Grace Walker, Senior Advisor, the Lark Hill Fund. The same woman who used to sit silently outside his office now held the power to approve or kill his company's next global venture, and she knew it. The video call started right on time. Grace appeared on screen in a pale gray blazer, her expression unreadable, eyes calm and clear. The background behind her was minimal sunlight, books, a vase of fresh-cut lilies. It suited her, professional, elegant, distant. "Morning, everyone," Daniel said, trying to set the tone. "Let's get started." The first 30 minutes were all numbers, slides, market analyses, risk assessments. Grace asked pointed questions, her voice precise, controlled. Marcus watched, silent. He waited for her to look at him. She never did, not once. After the meeting ended, she stayed on the call. So did Marcus. There was a pause. He spoke first. "Grace." She nodded. "Marcus." Her voice was civil, nothing more. "I didn't know you were joining the call. I was asked to step in by the fund's directors. It's temporary." He looked down at his desk. "You were good today." She gave a tight smile. "I always was. You just never noticed." The words landed sharper than expected. He looked up. "I noticed," he said. She tilted her head. "After you humiliated me." A long silence. He exhaled. "I was trying to fit you into a room that wasn't worthy of you." Grace blinked slowly. but her face didn't soften. That's not how it felt. I know. Another pause. He leaned forward. I thought I was protecting you from them. From the way they look at people who don't belong. But maybe I was just protecting myself. She let out a breath that wasn't quite a sigh. I didn't need your protection, Marcus. I needed your respect. He nodded. I'm sorry. She studied him. The apology hung in the air, not grand, not rehearsed, just real. For the first time since Denver, her voice softened. I know, she said, but softness didn't mean surrender. She adjusted her blazer, her tone shifting back to neutral. We'll review the expansion proposal and get back to you by Friday. He nodded. Of course. She reached for the mouse. Goodbye, Marcus. He opened his mouth, but she ended the call. The screen went black. Marcus sat in the stillness, heart pounding. There were no raised voices, no dramatic exits, just two people sitting across a cold divide of consequence. But he felt something shift, a door not quite opened, but no longer closed. The air in Boulder carried a certain kind of silence. It wasn't the absence of noise, it was the presence of stillness. Grace Walker hadn't returned in years, not since the headlines, not since the name Walker had fallen from whispered admiration to public scandal. But on this cool September afternoon, she stood on the edge of the old property, her heels sinking slightly into the soft ground, as if the land itself remembered her weight. The Walker estate was long sold. The stone house now belonged to a retired couple who ran an organic vineyard. The roses her mother once tended had been replaced by rows of lavender, but the tree remained, an old oak, at the back of the hill, bent, weathered, still standing. The memory tree, her mother had called it. They used to tie ribbons to its branches on birthdays and graduations, each one representing a hope, a prayer, a promise. Grace hadn't tied one in over a decade. Today, she came with nothing in her hands but the past. She walked slowly, the wind threading through her coat, her scarf catching against her neck like a memory. The air smelled of damp soil and sunlight on bark. At the base of the tree, she sat down on the low stone bench her father once had installed. It was cracked now. Time didn't ask permission to move on. Grace closed her eyes. In the stillness, it came back in pieces. Her mother's laughter during summer garden parties, the sound of piano drifting through the open windows, her father's voice before he lost it to lies and headlines, and herself, at 17, reading books beneath this tree, dreaming of the world. She opened her eyes slowly. There was no grief in her expression. Only distance, like a photo you know by heart, even if the frame is gone. She pulled from her coat pocket a small piece of ribbon, green satin. She hadn't meant to bring it, but it was there. She tied it quietly to the lowest branch. No ceremony, no whispered wish, just the motion of letting something go. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. Back in town. Grace stopped by the old bookstore cafe where she once worked summers. The same man owned it, though older now, with grayer hair and slower steps. He recognized her instantly. You're taller, he smiled. I'm stronger, she replied. He nodded as if he already knew. Over tea, they spoke little. Some silences don't need filling. Before she left, he said, that tree still holds every ribbon. She smiled softly. Even the forgotten ones, especially those. That night, in a small rental overlooking the edge of Boulder Creek, Grace stood by the window and watched the stars blink alive above the mountains. She thought of Marcus, not with anger, not even with regret, but with the awareness that some people didn't mean to hurt you. They were just too wounded to see where you ended and they began. He had apologized. That mattered. But it didn't mean she owed him anything. Grace Walker had spent too long bending herself to other people's stories. She wasn't going to do that anymore. She whispered to the glass, voice barely audible over the breeze, I'm allowed to come home to myself. And somewhere, deep inside her chest, something uncurled, something soft, something warm, hope, maybe, or peace, or just the quiet knowledge that she could love herself better than anyone ever had before. The email was short. Grace, I'll be in Boulder next week for a sustainability forum. No expectations, no pressure. But I'd like to see you, even just for coffee. M. He hovered over send for a full minute, then tapped the key and leaned back in his chair like he'd dropped something heavy off his chest. He didn't expect a reply. He didn't deserve one. But she answered the next morning, Tuesday, 4 p.m., Flatiron Trailhead Cafe. Nothing more. No greeting, no signature, just coordinates. But it was enough. Marcus arrived 10 minutes early. It wasn't like him, but nothing about this part of his life felt familiar anymore. The cafe was quiet, tucked between a gear shop and a trail rental cabin, woodsy, local, the kind of place with handwritten menus and scratched-up tables. It reminded him of a version of the world he'd never really belonged to, but maybe should have. Grace walked in at exactly 4:03. No makeup, jeans, wool coat, hair down. She looked like herself, more than she ever had. He stood. Hi. Hi. She sat across from him without fanfare. No handshake, no careful posture, just presence. For a while, they didn't talk about anything important. He asked how Boulder had changed. She told him about the new art gallery, the expanded creek path. He mentioned the nonprofit she'd helped him find, how he joined their board. She nodded, unsurprised. Then silence fell. Not awkward, but full. He broke it. I didn't come to fix anything. She looked up. I came because you mattered, because you still do. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes shifted, less guarded, more listening. He continued. When I brought you to that reunion, I thought I was giving you something, a stage, maybe a kind of recognition. But the truth is, I wanted you there to reflect well on me, not for who you were, but for how you made me look. Grace said nothing. He swallowed. That's what I hate most about the man I was. Another pause. I'm not asking for anything. Grace, not forgiveness, not a second chance, just the chance to stand in front of you without hiding. She looked at him carefully. You hurt me. I know, not just with what you said, with what you didn't say. All those years. Marcus nodded. You were right. I didn't see you. Not really. She exhaled, looked out the window. There were children playing near the trailhead. Someone's dog barked at a squirrel. A breeze swept pine needles across the sidewalk. Do you know why I came today? She asked softly. He shook his head. I wanted to see if you'd changed. If you came here as the man you think you are now, or if it was just another performance. He said nothing. Grace studied him. You didn't come in a suit, she noted. He smiled faintly. I almost did. Then I remembered who I was meeting. That earned him a flicker of something, almost a smile. Almost. She stood. I don't know what this is, Marcus, or what it's supposed to become. He rose too, uncertain. She looked at him, not past him, not through him, at him. But I know I'm not angry anymore. He blinked. I'm glad. And that matters, she added, because now I get to choose how the story ends, not you. She turned to go, then paused. Walk with me. He blinked. Now. They walked along the trail, side by side, not touching, not talking much, but not apart. Just two people crossing a bridge, not over water, but over time. And maybe, just maybe, towards something new. Autumn lingered a little longer in Boulder that year. The leaves stayed golden, as if unwilling to fall just yet. The air carried that crisp edge that smelled like firewood and change. Grace Walker sat at the edge of the lake near Flatiron Park. Her boots dug softly into the ground, a paperback closed beside her. She wasn't reading, just watching the light shift across the water. A quiet had settled inside her. Not emptiness, not numbness, but the kind of quiet that comes after the storm has passed, when the damage is seen, touched, understood, and yet there's something still standing, like herself, behind her. Soft footsteps approached. She didn't turn, just spoke, as if she'd known. You always were terrible at walking quietly. Marcus laughed under his breath. Still true. He came around and sat beside her, not close, but close enough. He looked out at the water with her. They said nothing for a long time. Finally, he asked, "How do you know when something's healed?" Grace took a breath. "You don't. Not all at once. Sometimes you just notice. It doesn't hurt to breathe anymore." He nodded slowly. She turned to him. "I used to think forgiveness was a gift I owed other people," she said. "But it's not. It's what I give myself when I'm ready to move on." Marcus swallowed. "And are you?" She looked back at the water. "I am." He nodded, looked down at his hands. "I miss you." "I know." Another pause. Then she said it, almost like a whisper. "I missed me too." He looked at her. Really looked, not like a man asking for something, but like a man witnessing something rare. "You're different now," he said. "I'm myself now." And then, gently, he asked, "Is there a place for me in that version of you?" She didn't answer right away, because there are questions that deserve silence before response. Then, softly, "There might be." He exhaled. Not relief, not certainty. Just breath. She stood, brushing off her coat, picked up her book, turned to him. "I'll walk with you a little." A pause, "But not behind you. Not anymore." He nodded. "No, beside me." And they did, side by side, step by step. No promises, no labels. Just the quiet answer that sometimes the best kind of love is the kind that doesn't try to fix you. It just sees you and stays. Maybe the most painful kind of silence is when someone sees you every day but never really sees you. Grace didn't seek revenge. She didn't need to prove her worth with noise. She simply chose to walk in her truth, and that, quietly, changed everything. This is more than just a love story. It's a reflection of the subtle ways we judge, of the beauty we miss, when we're too busy looking for it in the wrong places. Let this story be a reminder. Every person you pass by, at the office, in the elevator, across a coffee shop counter, carries a world inside them that you know nothing about. And sometimes, the people we underestimate the most are the ones who've already learned how to stand alone. If this story moved you, if it made you feel seen, or made you remember a time you weren't, then hold on to that feeling. Let it guide how you see others tomorrow. Leave us a comment. Tell us, when was the moment you chose yourself? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to Shining Stories for more heartfelt journeys that speak straight to the soul. Because somewhere out there, someone is waiting to be seen. And maybe it starts with you.